All right, welcome back, everybody. This is our final day together. We're going to look at some of the different resume examples that you created and emailed to me. Before we do that, though, there are a couple of resources I want to share with you. I'm going to jump into my PDFs here real quick. And what I'm going to, one second here, I got a couple more right around 9 o'clock there that people sent to me. And Anastasia and Jagraj, I got your emails. So we'll take a look at those this morning as well. But before we do, I'm going to send you the Employment Services Self-Marketing Toolkit. This document gives you some additional information on resumes and cover letters. For the resume component, it's going to include a lot of information that we've talked about this week, but it'll be a nice way for you to go back and review things that we've discussed in more detail, and give you some things to think about. So, for example, there's information on formatting and content and things like that. That's on page 4, and there's lots of good information in here as well. So it's definitely something that you'll want to go back to and make reference to. If you can't think of the answer right off the top of your head, or you're like, I think Dale talked about that. What did he say again? There's good info in here. There's a little bit of conversation around cover letters, aptitude tests, and preparing for the job interview. So there's some information in there. Not as detailed as the workshop here, but it'll give you an additional resource to work through and maybe answer some questions you might have. 3 other documents I'm going to send to you. These documents are interesting. They were created by the University of Saskatchewan. Each university tends to have like a careers department where students can go and get advice when they're applying for internships, careers, and that kind of planning. And one of the things that they provide is information on, creating resumes and other job search tools. And so they have examples of a chronological resume, a functional resume, and a combination hybrid resume. One of the things I like about their resources is that they give you some additional tips in the margins here, so you can see, some additional information. And maybe, it'll give you some ideas about how you want to include it in your resume. One challenge with this document here is important to remember these resumes were created and targeted for students who are leaving university. So they may not have a lot of professional work experience. They have some credentials, their education and things like that, but they may not have a lot of relevant work experience. So we see that these are targeted to a person in a specific stage of life. Having said that, when we move to a new labor market, there's going to be some similarities actually, right? We have some experience or maybe a lot of experience, but in a different labor market. We've got maybe the credentials, we've had our education assessed. So there's going to be some similarities there too, where we're creating a new network within a professional context. So one thing that I like about it, aside from the extra advice in the margins, here's the chronological resume. It's going to give you some additional formatting ideas along the way. You'll see here they've got highlights of qualifications. This is the chronological. Then their education. Makes sense. They just completed their education, so any job they're applying for probably going to be related to that. And then their work experience is listed below. And, I didn't mean to do that. Some do. And you can see that they've done some interesting ways of formatting. So this is a nice example here. I'll zoom in a little bit. Here's an example where they've got their work history. They've listed the employer first because they had several temporary roles within that organization as a health improvement consultant and a health project management specialist. So 2 different positions within the same employer. To save space, they've grouped them under the employer's name instead of under the job title. And so you can see here they've got the full date range they worked for the Saskatchewan Health Quality Board, and then each position is highlighted below with the specific date range for it. So an interesting way of sharing that kind of information. And if we scroll to page 2, this is another thing. You'll see that they listed their extracurricular activities, which is their volunteer and their interests and their memberships together under one heading. And they use the volunteer as a subheading. So another interesting way of doing it. Lastly, they've included their references on the resume. You wouldn't have to, but if you were, this would be a nice way of formatting them. So here we can see they're doing them across to save space, and it looks good. So that's an example of the chronological. They also included a functional. We see their education and certifications and training are listed first, but then we come into their summary of skills, and their key skills they're focused on are community service and leadership. And once again, this is an interesting example. They provided this bullet here. We see their work experience is as a supervisor and team leader at McDonald's. Okay, now their education is in psychology, specifically criminology and addictions. And so community service and leadership are skills they want to emphasize. Their experience working at McDonald's, not relevant to the career path necessarily, but it does demonstrate some leadership. So if we look down here at this highlighted bullet, they organize staffing schedules and manage production capacity for 50 employees at McDonald's, balancing the needs of parents, high school and post-secondary students, and workers with multiple jobs. So some good leadership here. We've got organized and managed, 2 transferable skills that are also adding value as qualifiers here. And their leadership here, well, 50 employees, they're giving us the scope and scale of their work with a quantifier here. So this is a nice example of how this bullet on a chronological resume would appear under this job title here. Don't have to change it a lot to make it fit under the leadership heading in a skills section. We're simply repositioning it or reorganizing it, recontextualizing it. So it's just like we were talking about earlier this week. On page 2, they've got some of their involvement on campus and some of the awards they've received throughout. So another nice example of a functional resume. And then lastly, they also have a combination hybrid. So we end up, I'll zoom in here. Sorry, I zoomed out. We don't have a career summary here. My guess would be they're submitting a cover letter, so it would be redundant or it might be repetitive. So instead, they list their education first. Then a summary of skills. The 2 areas they're focused on are project management and collaboration. And then down here, they do something really interesting, and I wanted to point this out for the end of our time together this week. We know that that their work experience is listed in reverse chronological, with the most recent at the beginning and the less recent closer to the bottom. And sometimes when our work experience, isn't the most relevant job isn't the most recent, we're burying our most relevant positions further down our page with our more recent positions near the top. What they did here is they took their work experience and they broke it into 2 sections: related or relevant work experience, and on page 2 at the top here, supplementary or additional work experience. Now, it would take a special situation for me to choose to do something like this because it is inconsistent with standard formatting practices. But this is work experience that they want to share, but it's not relevant to the job they're applying for, or it's not as relevant. So they put it in a supplementary or additional work experience section. One challenge you might run into here is that depending on where this work falls, the work experience you're listing first might look further back. And so if the employer doesn't read to a second page or further down the page, it might look like we have a lengthy gap in our work history recently, right? So this is that cost-benefit analysis. Is the benefit of having relevant work experience at the top better than the risk of an employer missing that we've been employed the whole time because we're not placing them all in a comprehensive chronological order? But it's an interesting idea, and I like that they share it with us here. And it is something that in certain circumstances I might consider, having a supplementary work experience section and a related work experience section so that I can prioritize the work I want that employer to see first. this might be useful if we, let's say we had worked in our particular area or industry as an accountant or an architect or an engineer for a number of years. We arrive in Canada, we find a survival job, we work there for 6 months or a year while we get credentials assessed, network, and things like that. That Canadian experience is valuable, right? Employers want to see Canadian experience, but the work we were doing might not be relevant. So we might have our related or relevant work experience at the top, so we can show the work that we've done in jobs or career oriented positions, and then have a supplementary work experience section for our Canadian work experience that is maybe not as relevant. So an interesting idea there. And like I said, I will email you all three of those resume styles from the U of S, as well as our employment readiness booklet here. So look for those in your email today, and you can use those, of course, going forward when you're looking for ideas on how to work on your resume. 1 second here. All right. So with that being said, we're going to take a look at some resumes. Excuse me. And so with that being said, I'll stop today's recording.